Welcome back, Algebra 1. We are continuing on with the Chapter 8 study guide with factoring. So we are doing starting on number 14 on the third page. So if you guys, haven't tried these problems on your own, I really encourage you guys to try these first on your own and then, come back and watch the video and make sure you're doing them correctly. So I just really encourage you guys to try all of these every time by yourself, since that's how, in the future, that's how it's going to be. Okay, so we have three terms, 10x squared plus 65x plus 100. And I think, do those have a GCF? And they do. Between 10 and 65 and 100, I can actually factor out first a 5. And so that's what I'm going to do first. I'm going to factor out a 5. And then I would be left with 10 divided by 5 is 2. 65 divided by 5, let's do that, is 13. And then 100 divided by 5 is 20. So then I look first, before that was kind of like not manageable, right? 10 times 100 is going to get me 1,000, and that's going to be hard to come up with. Now, this is a little bit more manageable. So I always recommend first, if there is a GCF, factoring out a GCF. So factor a GCF first, if possible. So the last ones that we did in the last video, that wasn't possible. There wasn't a GCF. But with this one, there was. We could divide and factor out a 5 from every single term. And so now the process becomes a little bit more simpler. We're now multiplying 2 times 20 to get what multiplies together to get me 40, and then my bottom number is 13. So I'm thinking, what two numbers multiply together to get me 40 and add to get me 13? And so if you're thinking 8 and 5, you would be correct. So that 5 is going to hang out. It's going to stay there. It's not going to go anywhere. And then we're going to actually work just with the middle. I'm going to ignore the 5 for now, and I'm just going to split the middle term here. So 2x squared is going to stay the same. That doesn't change. But 13x, we're going to split up between 8x and 5x. So what goes better with 2, 8 or 5? I think 8 does. And so I've split up my middle term. And now I can factor by grouping. 2x squared plus 8x and 5x plus 20. So 2x squared and 8x, what number goes evenly into that? And right now I'm just going to ignore the 5. So we can factor out a 2x, and I'd be left with x plus 4. 2x squared divided by 2x is x. 8x divided by 2x is 4. Bring down my middle sign. And what can factor out of 5x and 20? Well, 5. And I'm left with 5x divided by 5 is x. 20 divided by 5 is 4. Are these the same? They sure are. We're good. So we can write it as 1. So x plus 4 and then 2x plus 5. Now we can't forget that 5. That 5 was factored out from the beginning. If I don't keep it and leave it off, my answer is going to be wrong. So we have to write it there. So if 5 times x plus 4 times 2x plus 5. If you left it off and you multiplied this back together, you wouldn't get 10x squared plus 65x plus 100. You would only get the 2x squared plus 13x plus 20. So you've got to make sure, if I were to multiply that back together, would I get the same answer? Okay, so 15 says x cubed minus 4x squared minus 45x. So I look to see, do they have a GCF? Well, they don't have a number in common, but what do they have in common? Well, they all have an x term. So I can factor out an x from everything. X cubed divided by x is x squared. Negative 4x squared divided by x is negative 4x. And 45 divided by x is negative 45. And then it actually leaves us something nice. So the first thing we do is factor out a GCF. And then I have now 3 terms. So I have a trinomial. And a is equal to 1. So that's nice because then I can use my shortcut. 1 times negative 45 is negative 45. And my b term is negative 4. So I'm thinking what two numbers multiply together to get me negative 45 and add to get me negative 4? Well, that's going to be negative 9 and positive 5. So I don't have to split the middle term. I can split the middle term on this one. But if I didn't want to split the middle term, I could just go straight to the shortcut since a is equal to 1. And I can go x minus 9 and x plus 5. Remember, we kept that x there. So we're good. That's my final answer. Remember, you guys can always check your work by multiplying this back together. Okay, 16. 16 has 2 terms. They are both perfect squares, and they are both subtracting. So what this is a difference of squares. Okay. Remember, with a difference of squares, we're thinking, what's the square root of x squared? Well, it's x. And what's the square root of 9? Well, it's 3. So I can split this up into my 2 parentheses. X and x, my first term, and then 3 and 3, my second term. And then it's plus and minus. So my factors are x plus 3 times x minus 3. And that's it. Difference of squares is, like, to me, the most basic one, but sometimes we forget about it because it's so basic. But that's it. That's your final answer. You can write it in any order. Doesn't matter. Let's look at 17. So 17 is 100x squared minus 121y squared. There are 2 terms and subtracting. Whenever there are 2 terms and they're subtracting, I always think, is this a difference of squares? So I think 100x squared, was 100 a perfect square? And it is. And then I think 121, is 121 a perfect square? And it is. So I think, what is the square root of 100x squared? And it's 10x. And what's the square root of 121y squared? That's 11y. So then I have my 2 terms that I'm going to be splitting up into my 2 parentheses. So that would be 10x and 10x, and then 11y and 11y. Plus, minus, that's my answer. So 10x plus 11y and 10x minus 11y. And that's that. Okay, so 2x squared minus 200. 2 terms, they're subtracting, so I'm thinking difference of squares. But wait, 2 is not a perfect square and 200 is not a perfect square. So I think, wait a second, does a number go evenly into both of those? Is there a GCF I can factor out? And there is. So I can actually factor out a 2 from both of these. And I'd be left with x squared minus 100. Now here I still have 2 terms, they're subtracting. Now, is x squared a perfect square and is 100 a perfect square? And the answer is yes, they both are. So I can split those up. The square root of x squared is x, so x and x. And the square root of 100 is 10, so 10 and 10. One's plus, one's minus. And then it's fully factored. So 2 times x plus 10 and 2 times x minus 10. And that is it. So let's start on number 19. Number 19 is kind of there to trick you. Sorry, not sorry. Okay, so x squared plus 81. So there's two terms. They're both perfect squares, but what is missing from this? So hopefully you guys notice what's missing from this is that it's adding, or it's not subtracting. And so it's adding, this isn't a difference of squares. So we can start to think, well, what two numbers multiply together to get me 81, positive 81, but add to get me 0? And there isn't any. So that means that this is actually not factorable. And when something is not factorable, we call it prime. And that is that one. That one's an easy one. Okay, so then 20. So 20, 10x squared plus 75x plus 35. I first think, is there a GCF that I can factor out between all of those terms? And there is. All of them are divisible. Like every single term is divisible by 5. So I'd be left with 2x squared plus not 25. 15. Sorry, that was poor math there. I was thinking 3. Okay, so 15x plus 7. And now I can factor this. Now, let's say you didn't. Let's say you didn't factor out a GCF. That you'd still get, like, you could still do the big X and then be able to get here, but then you'd have to factor out from, like, your one of these. You'd have to factor out a GCF from that. So I always like to just check for a GCF first and then go on my way. So I'd start with my big X. On top is going to be A times C, so 2 times 7, which is 14. And on bottom is going to be 15. So I'm thinking, what two numbers multiply together to get me 14 and add to get me 15? And sometimes it's funny, this one is always like a more difficult one because you guys have a hard time thinking, what are the two numbers that multiply together to get me 14 and also add to get me 15? Well, that's 14 and 1. Some of you guys sometimes just forget that 14 and 1 aspect there. So we're going to use that to split the middle term. So 2x squared is going to stay the same, but I'm going to split up 15 into 14 and 1. So I think what goes better with 2, 14 or 1? And really both of them go fine with it. So then I think, what about 7? Well, I would put 14 with 7. So I'm going to put 1x plus 14x plus 7. If you did it opposite, you should still get to the same answer. So we split it up. And then I can factor by grouping. So 2x squared, 14x plus 7. Factor out my GCF. So from 2x squared and 1x, I can only factor out an x. 2 and 1, the only number that goes into both of those is 1. So 2x squared divided by x is 2x. And 1x divided by x is 1. My sign goes always there, bring it down. And then what goes into 14x and 7? Well, look at the smallest number. Does 7 go into 14? And it does. So 14x divided by 7 is 2x, and 7 divided by 7 is 1. I check, are these the same? They are. So we're good. We write that as 1. And then what's left? What's left is x plus 7. And then the one thing I can't forget is to bring down that 5. Don't forget to always bring down that GCF. You can always check and remind yourself, like, multiply it out to make sure you get that 10x squared plus 75x plus 35. So my final answer is 5 times 2x plus 1 times x plus 7. And that is it for 20. Okay, I'm going to continue on with the next page because it's we're almost done here. Okay, so 21 says if the area of a rectangle, area is one of our big words. So I'm going to just like box it. If the area of a rectangle can be represented by 3x squared minus x minus 10, and the length is represented by x minus 2. Determine the width of the rectangle. Okay, so area. Area is an indicator for what operation. So what operation do we use when we're finding the area of something? And if you're saying to me multiplication, you're right. Because area is length times width. So I'm just going to draw like a diagram here. So it says if the area is represented by 3x squared minus x minus 10, and we know that the length is x minus 2, and so it's saying, well, what's the width? Well, what I can do is I can actually factor 3x squared minus x minus 10 and figure out what's the missing factor here. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to factor 3x squared minus x minus 10. And so that's my 3 terms. So I'm going to split the middle term, and I'm going to draw my big X to start with. So 3 times negative 10 is negative 30. And then my B term is actually negative 1. So I'm thinking, what 2 numbers multiply together to get me negative 30 and add to get me negative 1? So if you're thinking negative 6 and positive 5, you would be correct. Negative 6 times 5 is negative 30. Negative 6 plus 5 is negative 1. So then I can split my middle term. 3x squared minus 6x plus 5x minus 10. Doesn't matter what order you put the 6 and the 5, and then factor by grouping. So from 3x squared minus 6x, I can factor out a 3x, and I'm left with x minus 2. I bring down my middle sign. 5x minus 10, I can factor out a 5, and I'm left with x minus 2. So are these the same? Yes, they are. So that's my one of them. And my other one is 3x plus 5. So we go back to the question. It says the length is represented by x minus 2, and which is one that we have. We know that this is my length. So that means that this must be my width. So determine the width of the rectangle. The width would be equal to 3x plus 5. And that is that. So area, if it gives you the full area and it wants you to find the 2 side lengths, you can just factor. Okay, so then our last 3 problems are spiral review. So this is from the last chapter. So we're going to go through those. So it says find the sum of the polynomial and write your answer in standard form. So the sum, that tells us, like, it's without even saying it, we know it's the sum because of that plus. Remember that all that means is with this, we're just distributing really a positive 1, which doesn't change anything. So I can get rid of the parentheses, and I'm just combining like terms. So it's 2x squared minus 5x plus 6 plus 5x squared minus 3x plus 4. So then I combine what is the same. Remember, like terms have to have the same variable with the same exponent. So 2x squared, I like to see what else has an x squared, and that's a 5x squared. So we'd add those together. 2x squared plus 5x squared gets me 5, 6, 7 x squared. So we're only adding the coefficients in front. Okay, so then we move to the next one. Negative 5x minus 3x. They both have an x and an x. Negative 5 plus negative 3 gets me negative 8. The x doesn't change. And then our last one are the numbers without variables, 6 and 4. 6 plus 4 just gets me 10. And then I write it in standard form. Remember, standard form means that the highest exponent goes first, numbers go last. So 7x squared minus 8x plus 10. And that's my final answer. Okay, so 23 is saying find the difference, which we know that because of that minus in between. So the only thing that changes is we have to distribute a -1 to every single term. So we're not multiplying here, we're just distributing the -1. So 7x squared minus 3x stays the same, and then it becomes minus 4x squared minus 2x and plus 2 because I distributed a negative to every single term. And then I'm at the same spot that I was up here. I just combined my like terms. So 7x squared minus 4x squared. So they have the same variable, the same exponent. So 7 minus 4 is 3x squared. And then negative 3x minus 2x. Same variable, negative 3 plus negative 2 is negative 5x. And then 2 doesn't have anything that it can combine with, so we just leave it as is. And then we want to write it in standard form. So highest exponent to number, so 3x squared minus 5x plus 2. And that is that. And then our last one, multiply 3x minus 2y squared. Remember that squared means that we are writing it twice. So with that being said, we now you guys can either use the box method or you can multiply like FOIL. I'm going to FOIL. So 3x times 3x is 9x squared. 3x times negative 2y is negative 6xy. And then I move to my next term. Negative 2y times 3x is negative 6xy. And negative 2y times negative 2y is positive 4y squared. Combine my like terms, negative 6y and negative 6xy and negative 6xy are like terms. So my final answer is 9x squared minus 12xy plus 4y squared. And that is technically like standard form because these all have a degree of 2. This has a degree of 2. This has a degree of 1 plus 1 is 2. And this has a degree of 2. If you wrote it in like 9x squared plus 4y squared minus 12xy, that's fine too. So it really doesn't matter. And that is the study guide. So if you guys have questions on the study guide, remember you guys can always come to office hours. Office hours are for first period. Well, just check your emails because they might be changing coming up. So yeah, please come in, like check your emails, check Google, the Google Calendar. Those are always up there as well. So if you guys need any help, come by, stop by. I'm happy to help you guys or email me your questions. And then that is that. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your day and I will see you soon.